The DNA is telling us. Doing the Y chromosome work, I found that there wasn't a link between Richard III and the male line relatives who are alive today.
For more than 500 years, the legacy of King Richard III has been wrapped in mystery, scandal, and controversy. Was he the ruthless usurper who murdered his nephews in the Tower of London? Or was he a misunderstood monarch condemned by propaganda and the politics of his time? For centuries, historians debated. Playwrights like Shakespeare painted him as a villain, and the world largely accepted a version of Richard that may not have been entirely true. But in 2012, everything changed. In a discovery that stunned both scholars and the public, archaeologists unearthed Richard's long-lost remains beneath a parking lot in Leicester, England. What followed was one of the most fascinating scientific investigations in history, a forensic puzzle where DNA evidence, skeletal analysis, and centuries-old records came together to reveal startling truths about the last Plantagenet king. Yet what researchers uncovered was far more unsettling than anyone expected. His curved spine told of a painful struggle with scoliosis, a condition that must have shaped not only his body, but also his psyche. His battle wounds revealed the brutal violence of his final moments at the Battle of Bosworth. And his DNA carried secrets about his royal bloodline. Secrets that cast doubt on the legitimacy of a dynasty and altered the way we view English history. This was not just the story of a king's rediscovery. It was the unraveling of myths, the confirmation of betrayals, and the shocking realization that Richard III's life and death were even darker than Shakespeare imagined. So what did the DNA really prove? And why are the answers more troubling than the centuries of rumors? Let's uncover the heartbreaking truth of King Richard III. For centuries, Richard III was believed to be lost to time. After his death at the Battle of Bosworth in 1485, his body was taken to Greyfriars, a Franciscan friary in Leicester. Accounts suggested he was buried hastily, stripped of his armor, and denied the dignity typically afforded to a king. When Henry VII, the first Tudor monarch, rose to power, he had little interest in memorializing his enemy. As decades passed, the friary was destroyed during the dissolution of the monasteries, and Richard's grave disappeared from public memory. For generations, people assumed his remains had been scattered or worse, thrown into a river, but the legend never fully died. Local whispers hinted that Richard still lay somewhere in Leicester. In the early 2000s, a group of historians, genealogists, and members of the Richard III Society began to seriously search for him. Among them was Philippa Langley, whose determination became the driving force behind the excavation project. With little funding and almost no guarantees, the team focused their efforts on a nondescript location in Leicester, a city council parking lot, believed to be the site of the former Greyfriars Friary. In August 2012, excavation began. At first, the dig seemed uncertain. Archaeologists unearthed medieval pottery and fragments, but no royal grave. Then, shockingly, within days of the excavation, they found human remains. Even more astonishing was the skeleton's peculiar curvature of the spine, a feature that instantly raised the question, could this really be Richard III? Initial examination suggested it could be. The skeleton matched historical accounts of Richard's age, build, and cause of death. He was in his early 30s, slender, and bore wounds consistent with battle. Most notably, the skeleton showed severe scoliosis, a condition that caused the spine to curve dramatically to one side. Shakespeare had portrayed Richard as crook-backed, and Tudor propaganda often exaggerated his deformity to paint him as monstrous. Yet here was scientific evidence proving there was truth to those descriptions, though not in the grotesque form Tudor writers suggested. Still, skeptics demanded proof. That's where DNA came into play. Researchers turned to mitochondrial DNA, which is passed down through maternal lines. Remarkably, they traced Richard's living descendants through the female line, eventually finding Canadian-born Michael Ibsen, a direct 17th-generation relative of Richard's sister, Anne of York. Comparing DNA extracted from the skeleton's teeth and bones with Ibsen's confirmed the match beyond doubt. The remains belonged to King Richard III. The confirmation was historic. A king thought lost for more than half a millennium had been found beneath the asphalt of a modern parking lot. Newspapers across the world splashed headlines of the discovery, and for a brief moment, Richard was everywhere again, his name dominating conversations not as Shakespeare's villain, but as a rediscovered monarch whose true story might finally be told. But with the discovery came haunting revelations. Richard had not been buried with royal honors, but hastily thrown into a shallow grave. His body showed multiple wounds, including blows to the skull, one of which likely killed him. There were also signs of humiliation after death. His corpse may have been desecrated before burial, further evidence of the Tudor effort to tarnish his legacy. The world now had proof. Richard was real. His body was tangible, and his history was not just legend. Yet as the investigations continued, DNA analysis revealed something far more disturbing: secrets about his royal lineage and the legitimacy of kings that followed him. And those discoveries would shake the very foundation of England's monarchy. The initial DNA tests had already stunned historians by confirming the skeleton's identity. But as scientists probed deeper, the findings began to reveal something far more troubling than scoliosis or battle wounds. They uncovered secrets hidden within Richard III's bloodline. Itself, researchers at the University of Leicester compared the king's DNA with living male, descendants of the Plantagenet family. This line, known as the male Y chromosome, should have passed unchanged from father to son through generations of English kings. But to everyone's surprise, Richard's Y chromosome didn't match that of his supposed relatives. This discrepancy was nothing short of explosive. It suggested that somewhere along the Plantagenet line, a false paternity event had occurred. That is, an instance where the biological father was not the same as the man officially recorded in royal genealogy. In simpler terms, somewhere in the royal bloodline, an illegitimate child had been passed off as legitimate, altering the entire succession of kings. This revelation cast doubt not only on Richard III's legitimacy, but also on the very foundations of the Tudor dynasty and beyond. After all, if the male bloodline had been broken at some point, the claim to the throne could have been compromised for generations. The implications were staggering. Imagine centuries of royal power, wars, and succession crises, all possibly rooted in a fragile genealogy built on secrets and deception. The Wars of the Roses, the rise of the Tudors, even the very existence of Elizabeth I as queen, suddenly, all of it was shadowed by doubt. But researchers couldn't pinpoint exactly where in the lineage this break had occurred. It could have been generations before Richard or even later. The uncertainty only deepened the intrigue. What was undeniable, however, was that the so-called pure royal bloodline was not as unbroken as history had claimed. For some, this revelation was thrilling, an opportunity to revisit centuries of history and question long-accepted narratives. For others, it was deeply unsettling. Monarchies are built on the notion of legitimacy, the belief that kings and queens are rightful, heirs chosen by blood and God. But Richard's DNA showed that even the most sacred lineages could be tangled with scandal and human frailty. Even beyond the bloodline controversy, DNA revealed other intimate truths about Richard himself. His mitochondrial DNA confirmed his maternal heritage, linking him firmly to the House of York. But combined with the Y chromosome results, it painted a portrait of a monarchy far less stable than the polished stories told in textbooks. Historians noted that the findings also fueled the debate about whether Richard was truly the villain he had been made out to be. Shakespeare's hunchbacked tyrant, murderous and manipulative, had been propaganda commissioned by the Tudors, who needed to vilify their defeated rival. The real Richard, science suggested, was a man with a spinal deformity but not a monster, someone who lived with pain, insecurity, and perhaps the crushing weight of a kingdom that was already fractured from within. For centuries, Richard III's name was synonymous with betrayal, the king who murdered his nephews, the princes in the tower to secure the throne. But now, thanks to DNA, betrayal had been written into his own legacy in an entirely different way. Whether he knew it or not, his family's bloodline carried a secret that threatened to rewrite history. The discovery was more than a scientific milestone. It was a reminder that kings and queens, no matter how powerful, were still human, subject to the same flaws, scandals, and uncertainties as anyone else. And in Richard's case, those flaws had left a mark so deep that modern science could still trace them centuries later. Yet the DNA findings were only part of the story. What researchers also uncovered from Richard's bones, the wounds, the trauma, and the brutal evidence of his final battle would paint an even darker picture of his fate. In 2012, a quiet corner of Leicester, England, became the stage for one of the most astonishing discoveries in modern archaeology. Beneath an ordinary city car park, researchers unearthed a skeleton that would rewrite centuries of history. From the very beginning, there were striking signs that this was no common burial. The bones showed evidence of a severe curvature of the spine, eerily echoing historical descriptions of Richard III as a king, with a hunched back. Almost immediately, whispers began that the remains might belong to the last Plantagenet monarch who vanished after his defeat in 1485. The skeleton bore brutal battle wounds, slashes to the skull, stabs to the body, even evidence of humiliation after death. Historians had long recorded that Richard was killed at the Battle of Bosworth and denied the dignity of a royal burial. The shallow, hastily dug graves supported those accounts, revealing the grim fate of a fallen king whose body was discarded without ceremony. The image of Richard, once draped in royal armor, now reduced to bones beneath asphalt, captured the world's imagination. But speculation wasn't enough. Science had to provide answers. Researchers turned to genetic testing, collecting DNA from living descendants traced through Richard's maternal line. When the results came back, they were astonishing. The genetic markers matched perfectly, leaving no room for doubt. The bones under the car park were, in fact, those of King Richard III. For the first time in over 500 years, his final resting place had been revealed. The discovery electrified historians and the public alike. Some hailed it as the vindication of a king maligned by Tudor propaganda and Shakespeare's pen. Others saw the twisted spine and violent end as proof of a man whose reign was as controversial as his reputation. Yet beyond the debates, the find forced the world to reckon with a strange truth. England's last medieval king had been hiding beneath the tires of parked cars for centuries. The unearthing of Richard III's skeleton in Leicester was groundbreaking enough, but the real shock came after scientists dug deeper into his DNA. Once they had confirmed the remains belonged to Richard, geneticists began comparing his Y chromosome, the paternal line marker, with that of living male descendants from Richard's supposed family tree. What they discovered was explosive. The Y chromosome didn't match. Somewhere along the centuries, a break had occurred in the royal bloodline. This revelation sent shockwaves through the world of history and monarchy. It raised a chilling question. If Richard's paternal line had been broken, what did that mean for the legitimacy of the monarchs who came after him? The English crown was passed down through generations on the assumption of direct male lineage, but the DNA suggested otherwise. Had an illegitimate child been quietly slipped into the family tree, forever altering the course of British history? Or had multiple breaks occurred, casting doubt over the very foundation of royal succession? Historians debated fiercely. Some argued that the discovery didn't matter since monarchs ultimately rule by law, not biology. Others weren't so sure. If Richard III's bloodline had been compromised, then the claim to the throne by the Tudors, and even by today's royal family, looked far murkier. Imagine centuries of kings and queens all traced back through genealogical records, suddenly being thrown into question because of one secret affair, one hidden scandal, or one moment of betrayal. For the public, this twist only deepened the fascination with Richard III. Was he truly the villain that Shakespeare painted, a ruthless usurper and child killer? Or was he another victim of political spin, his reputation destroyed while secrets within the monarchy itself remained carefully buried? The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Richard had been vilified for centuries. Yet the real scandal might have been lurking in the bloodlines of those who succeeded him. The findings also reignited long-standing rumors about Richard's nephews, the princes in the Tower. If DNA evidence could challenge an entire dynasty's legitimacy, then perhaps the truth about what happened to those boys and who stood to gain from their disappearance was far more complicated than history books admitted. Suddenly, Richard didn't look like the only king with a mystery attached to his name. Ultimately, the skeleton beneath the Leicester car park gave us more than a face to a forgotten monarch. It forced us to confront the uncomfortable reality that history is far messier than we like to believe. The DNA results didn't just solve a mystery, they created new ones. Questions that reach across centuries and still hang over the monarchy today. Richard III's body may have been found, but his story and the shocking implications of his bloodline remain more unsettling than ever.